Hey everybody, it's Adam's Music Box here, and today we're going to celebrate the anniversary of the Deep Purple album Machine Head, which came out on this day in 1972. Deep Purple initially released their first album in '68 with a different lineup. It had the core musicians of Ritchie Blackmore on guitar, living legend, and a legend who obviously continues in a different genre, the organist Jon Lord, who unfortunately died several years back, and Ian Pace on drums. Those were the three guys who were the core of that Deep Purple sound. The original vocalist was Rod Evans, who later went on to form a short-lived but incredibly cool band that I love called Captain Beyond. And on bass, you had Nick Simper. And the band, at least in the US, had some hits early on with a cover of Joe South's the name is Sippy Me. Na 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 na. Hush. There you go. When in doubt, just sing it out. And they actually performed that on US TV on the very avant-garde Playboy After Dark. And there are videos of that that you can check out. But there was something that Blackmore and Lord felt was missing from that first lineup. So come 1969, they brought in a new bass player, Roger Glover, and a new vocalist, Ian Gillan, who had achieved fame as singing the role of Jesus Christ in Andrew Lloyd Webber's Jesus Christ Superstar. Now, for a band that's traditionally remembered for its hard rock, the first album that was recorded live, as it were, by that classic Mark II Deep Purple lineup was a piece that combined, that fused, because that's what fusion is, orchestral music and rock and roll. And this was, of course, the Concerto for Group, meaning rock group, and orchestra. And it was composed by Deep Purple organist Jon Lord. And the premiere was conducted by Sir Malcolm Arnold, a very, very renowned modern English orchestral composer who himself took a big risk by taking this project on. But he and Jon Lord had a very good relationship. And Jon Lord later thanked Sir Malcolm Arnold for really helping him to get this piece done. He was a really young guy taking on a really ambitious project. And it was not only ambitious in terms of its scale, a live performance and recording of an orchestral piece featuring a live hard rock band, but it was also very musically interesting. We see that Jon Lord had many influences that combined the kind of English late romantic composers with some Russian romantic influences, some influences of the European modernists, meaning those from the continent of Europe. And it was really a unique style, particularly for someone who was so young when he wrote such a lengthy and such a weighty piece. And all of the solos that it featured, organ solo, bass, drums, guitar, and of course a vocal number in the second movement, which really let Ian Gillan show off his live vocal prowess. It was a really interesting piece. And this was followed up by another collaboration between Jon Lord and Sir Malcolm Arnold, the Gemini Suite. Now, unfortunately, the original band performance of the Gemini Suite only exists in bootleg form, which has subsequently been released on Purple Records, but the sound quality is bootleg sound quality. Nevertheless, it's one of the best, it features one of the best vocal performances that Ian Gillan ever pulled off. Several years later, Lord would record it professionally in a studio, but without Deep Purple. But it was at this time where Ritchie Blackmore, who himself is a great lover of classical music, said, "We're not going where we need to go in terms of commercial success. Let's do a hard rock album. And if that doesn't work out, we'll go back to this fusion of orchestral and rock." Now, the hard rock album in question was Deep Purple in Rock, featuring so many great songs. Child in Time, one of my favorites from that. Perfect performances from all of the musicians. And that really set up the template for the Deep Purple Mark II that we all know and love. What was that template? It was very much Bach inspired. The dueling arpeggiations that featured in so many of Mark II Deep Purple's music was very much borrowed from Bach. And we could see both Blackmore and Lord trading these arpeggiations within their solos and within their comping. And it made for some really interesting music. Blues was, of course, the other really big influence on Deep Purple. It was really Bach plus blues. So even though a lot of modern modern, meaning today's hard rock, it's either very much classically derived or in some cases blues derived, but we see much less of that than we used to on hard rock. Deep Purple was a synthesis of both, which gave it both weight and soul, and it just really, really worked. Ian Pace's wonderful drumming held it all together. Roger Glover was a steady, super reliable bass player. Ian Gillan, one of the great hard rock and frankly, the great sort of Broadway West End style vocalists of all time. Now, Machine Head featured, of course, Smoke on the Water, which is a great story song. It tells the real life tale of the band watching Frank Zappa perform at the Montreux Jazz Festival. Well, it wasn't at the festival, I don't think. It was just at the casino there, but it was operated by the same promoter who did the Jazz Festival, Claude Nobbs, one of the great promoters in all of music festival history. But towards the end of the Zappa gig, as the lyrics go, some stupid with a flare gun burned the place to the ground because he shot the flare gun to the ceiling. This was an indoor casino, and the wooden roof just burnt and everything collapsed. No one died, which was something of a miracle. And so this story is immortalized in Smoke on the Water, which is not only one of the most memorable lyrics of all time, but it's one of those riffs where you could probably go into a Guitar Center today and hear someone somewhere play that riff, maybe playing it wrong, because Richie did say a lot of people who just play it by ear get it wrong, but there you go. But the album was chock full of hits: Highway Star, Space Truckin', the list goes on. And this really cemented Deep Purple Mark II in the annals of hard rock history. The Deep Purple story, though, doesn't end there. That lineup made one more album, but then things changed, and change in a musical world can sometimes be very good. Enter Deep Purple Mark III with the album Burn. Now, here we retain the Bach influences in Jon Lord and Ritchie Blackmore. We retain the blues elements, but we add a funk and soul element because the new bass player and sometimes vocalist Glenn Hughes was very much influenced by Stevie Wonder and other modern funk artists of that sort. David Coverdale had a much more R&B bluesy style vocal than the more sort of showy, stagey, if you will, Ian Gillan. So this lineup, Mark III, did Burn. They followed it up with another great album, Stormbringer. This was, of course, the lineup at the famous California Jam, where Ritchie Blackmore destroys the stage because the promoters didn't wait until sunset to put them on stage, as it was written in the contract. One of those hilarious stories of rock history. And then there was a very short-lived Deep Purple Mark IV, where Blackmore left and Tommy Bolin came in. Now, Bolin was a very interesting character. He had a real jazz fusion pedigree, playing on Billy Cobham's wonderful album Spectrum, which featured the Mahavishnu Orchestra's Jan Hammer on keys and the great Leland Sklar on bass. You might know him for being in Phil Collins's band for years and years and years. Longbeard, can't miss him. Bolin also played with his own band Zephyr. He released some solo albums to much acclaim around this time. And he was also temporarily, well, more than that, in the James Gang after Joe Walsh left. So interesting guy, but sadly, Bolin died during just at the end of that tour, the Come Taste the Band tour. Deep Purple then broke up for a few years, and Ian Gillan formed a couple of bands. First, the Ian Gillan Band, and then a band called Gillan. And even though Gillan left to be replaced by a much more funky, soulful Deep Purple Mark III and Mark IV, his solo stuff was incredibly funky. It was really rock and roll fusion. So definitely check out anything by the Ian Gillan Band or by the band called Gillan, because all of it is really, really good. Jon Lord continued to do a lot more stuff that combined fusion of orchestral and rock, big band and rock. He did some great stuff with Tony Ashton, did stuff with Ronnie Dio, all sorts of really interesting collaborations for him. And of course, Ritchie Blackmore formed Rainbow, first with Ronnie Dio, then with Graham Bonnet at vocals, then with Joe Lynn Turner, all of it really fun stuff. But Mark II returned in 1984 for the album Perfect Strangers, stuck together for just under a decade before Blackmore left. and Steve Morse comes in, and the rest is relatively recent history. I would say that the recent album, comparatively anyway, Now What, is really, really good. I don't know if it's Now What or What Now. Always confuse that. But one way or the other, Spotify will help you with that. The album served as a kind of tribute to Jon Lord, who had died a few years earlier, and it shows the Steve Morse incarnation of Deep Purple with Don Airey, great keyboardist there in its prime. But if there's one Deep Purple album that people the world over associate with the band, it is Machine Head, because it had it all. If they only did one album ever, and it was just Machine Head, people would still be talking about Deep Purple. That's how impactful it was. And of course, the band is still active. Ian Pace has said that they're sort of on the increasingly short road to retirement. So while it isn't the band that it was in 1972, go see Deep Purple if you can. They still put on a hell of a show. Apart from that, happy birthday, Machine Head. Remember to like, subscribe, and everything else, and we will see you next time.